This is lesson 1.2, Living in America. You should know that you are very, very lucky. Yeah, you listening to this right now happen to be very, very lucky. For one, believe it or not, you are rich. You might find that hard to believe, but let me prove this to you. This is a website called globalrichlist.com, and they've taken data from people all over the globe and compiled it into this site to show you just how rich you are compared to the rest of the world. So for instance, think of a job here in America that isn't the lowest paid job, not like a minimum wage job, but it's a job that maybe we know and we think of as not a very highly paid profession. Something where you need a college degree, but it's famous for not paying very well. Many of you might be thinking teacher, and I'll not be offended by that. We'll use that as an example. So the average teacher salary in the United States is around $40,000 a year. This is not a lot for a job that requires this many hours and this much education, so it's a good example for us to look at. But even with that amount of money a year, compared to the rest of the world, we can find out exactly where we stand. Here we go, let's try it. If you make $40,000 a year, let's see where you stand. Wow, even at $40,000 a year, compared to the rest of the world, you're in the top 1%, the top 0.57% of the richest people in the world. So a teacher, someone making kind of an average to low salary in our country, is still in the top 1% in the world. That really puts things in perspective. You're lucky to live in America. There are many people living in the world right now that live on less than $2 or $1 a day. That's incredible. So it's important for you to realize before we start this conversation about what journalism is, to understand what our country is. Our country has wealth and power, and just because you live there, even if you're living kind of average or low in our country, you're doing very well. It's important for you to know that not only because you live in this country are you considered rich, but because you live in America, you also have a lot of power. And you have a particular kind of power, and it's power that comes from this thing that we call democracy. That's important for you to know. A democracy is a form of government in which people choose leaders by voting. It's a country ruled by this form of government, or it's an organization or situation in which everyone is treated equally and has equal rights. Not everywhere in the world is a democracy. What makes a democracy work is the power of the vote. Let me explain. Let's say that you want high school teachers to get paid more. Or maybe you want high school teachers to be paid less. All you have to do is vote for whichever candidate supports your idea. Let's say candidate A wants more money for teachers and candidate B wants less money for teachers. You would simply vote for the candidate, and you actually have a say, and elect whichever one you agree with. And if your candidate wins, all you do is call them up or write them a letter once they're elected and remind them why you voted for them. Remind them, hey, I want teachers to have a raise. Or hey, we need to take some money away from these reckless teachers. And pretty amazing, even if your candidate doesn't win, you can still call them and write them letters as your representative and try to pressure them into agreeing with you after the fact. And sometimes you and other people can bother them enough that they'll actually change their mind and agree with you. Either way, they propose a bill which other representatives of other Americans vote on, and then that bill either passes into law or not. And as easy as Schoolhouse Rock, that bill either becomes a law and teachers are paid more or less. Now, let's say a law is passed that you don't like. In some places in the world where there's not a democracy, you're stuck with that law. You're stuck with it, and you better not say anything about it, because if you do speak up against it, you might be beaten or jailed, and actually, you might even be killed for speaking out against the government. For real, no joke. It happens every day all over the world. For simply having an opinion or saying what you think against the government or against the people in charge, it costs people their lives all over the world. And that's why you're lucky to live in a democracy that guarantees that you have something called freedom of speech. You're allowed to say what you think and to criticize the government, to disagree with things, to protest. And it's all because in our Constitution we have this thing called the First Amendment that guarantees your right to free speech. And this is super important. Democracy isn't perfect. People aren't perfect. So sometimes there are bad laws, or there are bad people who do things for the wrong reasons, like just to make money, or things in our history like Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws kept people separate in their races and kept things unfair and not equal. African Americans were even denied the vote, and that was law. But it was the First Amendment and our freedom of speech that allowed people in our country to protest against those bad laws and change them to where we don't have those laws anymore. We have the First Amendment and freedom of speech so that we're allowed to say, hey, this isn't right, or this isn't fair, or we need to change this, or even this just isn't working. And because sometimes there are bad people and bad ideas, those that founded our country and democracy said a lot of things about how important it is that we have a free press. And that's what makes journalism extremely important in our country and in the world. We have a free press that's supposed to speak out about these things. In our next lesson, we'll talk more about the First Amendment of the Constitution and why it's important for us as we study and participate in journalism to know it and take our job seriously.